We should all understand the basics of birth. We should all understand the basics of good nutrition. We should all have a good connection with our spouse and our children. We should all be comfortable with those in our household being present when we give birth. And that used to be normal. And there are still places in the world where that still is normal. And so some of my prep work was just recognizing that and really trying to learn as much as I could about those regions now that are still, many of them are really remote. And there's areas in South America, for example, where they don't have access to a professional midwife, but everyone knows how to give birth. And they all have a system for how to do that. And they all have a community.
Holy Wild Birth is a podcast embracing the reclamation of giving birth rooted in God's original design, undisturbed.
Here, we share home birth stories highlighting God's presence as the great midwife, as well as conversations about all aspects of a holistic, spirit-led childbearing year, from the perspectives of myself, traditional midwife Lauren Hall, of Rooted in Eden Private Membership Association,
and me, holistic birthkeeper and photographer Brooke Collier of Sister Birth. Together, we are co-founders and facilitators of Hearth Mother Journey, where we are raising up the next generation of holy wild birthkeepers.
To choose a holy wild birth journey is to consecrate all of your decisions unto the Lord and reclaim creation unadulterated by centuries of human attempts to control and improve upon what God has called good.
Please remember that birth is not a medical event, but a natural process, and we are not your care providers, so this should not be taken as medical advice. Okay, hey, Holy Wild Birth listeners. I am in the studio right now with Lauren and a special guest today, Rosalie, and we are going to be continuing the series on free birth before it was cool. That's our working title. And I really wanted to invite Rosalie to join us because she used to live in the same area as me. So we first met at my sister circles and connected over free birth conversations. She was probably one of the first free birthers. You probably were one of the first free birthers I really kind of knew in real life. So she's definitely been doing it before it was like a thing, and for just her own beautiful set of reasons. And so she was one of the first people I thought of as a veteran home free birther. So I'm going to let her tell you a little bit more about herself. So hi, Rosalie.
Hey. I met Brooke when we were in the same area, and her sister circles were just such a gift. And it was just such an amazing thing that God brought about in a pretty crazy pregnancy situation. My husband and I live in rural northern Michigan with our 8 kids, and our first 3 were hospital births, and then we had 5 free births in 3 different areas. So kind of a vast amount of experience, and it's been interesting in different areas and different perspective from the different places that we've done it too.
That's an interesting perspective. What has made it different, free birthing in different areas or regions? And are they like drastically different regions, like different states, or just different areas within Michigan?
No, it's all been Michigan, but all Michigan, but different parts of Michigan. So the first one was in the Upper Peninsula. That was, I don't know how much you want to get into my stories because it could be lengthy. So that was different just because it was, the UP is kind of its own little area.
Yeah, it's like a different world.
And it was, it's kind of unheard of to do home birth at all up there. So that was different for that reason. People were like, you had the baby and you had it at home? What?
There aren't really many midwives up there from what I understand.
Right. And then we moved down to Grand Rapids, and we had 2 more down there. And there it was like, well, why would you do it without a midwife? There are wonderful midwives. And I was like, you're right. There are wonderful midwives. This isn't a knock against midwives. Just we talked about maybe getting a midwife, but just felt God guiding us to go free again. And then in this region, there's a lot of Amish and Mennonite in this area. And it's really interesting in this region how much people are really accepting of home birth, whether you use a midwife or not. And in those communities, it's not unheard of for people to free birth. And they're kind of, they're pacifists and they're not real keen on the government meddling in their business. So it's kind of a lot more supportive of that kind of a choice here. So that's been interesting. And even people that aren't from those communities, often there's a connection there and they kind of are supportive. But yeah, it's been different depending on the area.
So just the difference was largely the community support and or acceptance of that decision and how you felt accepted by it.
I feel like in Grand Rapids there was a divide between the free birthers and the attendant home births.
Okay, sure.
And they're like home birth is home birth, whatever God guides you to do it. It's great.
Yeah, that's really interesting. The regional differences.
Most of the people I know here that have had home births so far for the midwife to come, that often the baby comes before the midwife makes it in.
Unintentionally.
Yeah, you end up with a planned free birth or an unplanned free birth either direction most of the time.
Sure.
If it's not baby. So there's that too. People are like, oh yeah, I guess I sort of did that too. I just, she came and helped clean up after.
Sure. Which is fun topic, like just the discussion of the difference between intentional and unintentional rebirth. Do you have any thoughts around that, or like why you intentionally chose to free birth?
Well, I think that it's a different kind of a thing as a Christian, for one thing. I think of free birth as an extension of my journey with the Lord, and also an extension of motherhood and an extension of my marriage. And so, like a lot of things, it wasn't what I expected to do. I remember watching a couple of videos of birthing in a stream or like crazy, these crazy hippies, right? I'm just thinking like, in the world, these women are nuts, It was not my plan, but it was God's plan. And with my first free birth, I really, really wanted to do a home birth. Like I said, there's just a desert of care providers in the UP. There's so much need up there. The hospitals are very spread out, and there's just in that portion in the eastern UP, there's no midwifery available. There wasn't at the time we were there. And so I saw a hospital midwife, and I had had a baby with her previously. And one of my friends had a really big baby, 11 or 12 pounds, I can't remember. And I think that kind of scared her. And she said something at one of the last appointment I went to. So I was seeing her. And the last appointment that I went to, I'd been feeling kind of led to do an unassisted birth, but my husband had some hang-ups. So I kept going to the prenatal care there at the hospital, and she said something about that I probably was going to have a big baby because my last baby had been 9 pounds. And she said something about, I've caught an 11-pound or 12-pound baby or something. I can't remember the size of that baby. But she said, but I don't want to have to do it again. And I was like, I don't have to do it again. I'm like, what are you going to do? Just step away and let the baby just, birth itself or whatever, It's a very odd thing to say to a client, And I just kind of was this thing that kind of played in my head after that. And I was just like, you know what? I think that was just what I needed to hear to have the courage to go forth and do what God's leading me to do, And I felt really comfortable with my husband.
I was just going to say, I love that her trepidation is what encouraged you to step into your full confidence and autonomy to take responsibility and have a free birth. Somebody else's fear was like, okay, thank you, I'll just do it. I think that's just such a lovely response to fear in and of itself, is that you just were like, okay, I'm not gonna pick up that fear. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it was just a reminder that the other thing that stood out in those appointments was just how much they almost would get mad at me if I didn't have something wrong, like they'd check my blood sugars and they would be normal, and they'd be like, man, they made me do my sugar test twice, and they were like, man, you had a 9-month baby last time. What are we missing here? And it was like,
Wow.
I'm not missing anything. I'm a healthy mom. Like, it's okay. It's okay for the mom to be healthy, right? And
Wow.
and there were just things like that kind of were leading up to that. That was the final thing that not so sure about this.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing that I tell people all the time that are considering doing a free birth is, for me personally, I know my husband knows me really, really well. I know that there are things that I would do subtly, body language, or maybe a little sound I might make. All these little things that he knows so well. He knows my body so well. And there are things that no practitioner would pick up on, that my husband would be like, that's off. Because he knows me so well.
That's
and
beautiful.
That we both relationship with one another and with the Lord. And there's a unity there, and there's a spiritual component there that we can't really match. And so there's a comfort of like, I just trust that God would make it really clear, because he's done that with other things and other urgent things that God has tipped us off to, because the other one just something simple. And we didn't have to necessarily etch it all out verbally. There's something that God does to a marriage. The longer you're married, the more true that is.
So good. So true.
Yeah. I feel like I hope I'm not remembering this wrong, as then I'll have some editing to do on this podcast episode. But I feel like you've told me in the past that you don't actually really love the word free birth, that you have kind of like a different thing you like to refer to your birthing choices as, right? What is that again? And why?
Yeah, well, most of the time I just tell people that I have my births, and if they dig further, then I will explain that I don't use a midwife. Most of the time, I think they don't ask that, but I like the term DIY birth, just because I feel like it's more, and I feel like unassisted and free birth both sound, I don't know, they sound reckless, and they sound sort of like stick it to the man, which isn't my intention at all. Like
Yeah.
I have an issue with midwives. I have dear friends who are midwives. And I greatly admire that profession. I don't think this isn't something that we've done because we're anti-midwife.
Yeah.
And I guess those terminologies give that impression.
I love that. So do-it-yourself birth, it has a different flavor to it in the sense that it's like, I am learning how to do this myself instead of, because unassisted is like it's defining itself in opposition to something. Like it is the not this.
Well, all the way along, I think, in any birth, the thing that I always tell people again is any birth can turn into a free birth. Any birth. So you could have a scheduled C-section and the power could blow out, or your anesthesiologist could get in a car accident and go to the hospital, or, there could be any number, or you could just have a really fast birth and, have the baby in the car on the way there. And I've known people in those scenarios. It's always better to know what, how birth works and have a little preparation, because any birth can turn into a good birth. And a really good practitioner will do that prep with you, and we'll talk through what you should do if the baby comes really fast, or for whatever reason,
Yeah,
it isn't an attendant.
Yeah. Yep. Because you're right, you just really do never know. And if you're not prepared for what you would do if you did find yourself in a situation where the person you intended to have assist you can't be there, then it ends up feeling traumatic and like abandonment instead of like a really powerful moment of like, yeah, well, we were prepared for that too. So here we are. Yeah. So speaking of preparing, like what does that look like for you? Because I think you had wild pregnancies too, where you didn't see like a care provider during your pregnancy. So what did prenatal care look like? How did you prepare for the big event of do-it-yourself birth?
Well, again, I think my perspective on birth is probably different than a lot of people's perspective. I think in our culture, in the U.S., we are just so upside down in the way we view birth. And I like to think that my mindset is kind of like I hope it's kind of like what my great grandma's perspective was like. And my great grandma, and my grandpa was a 13-pound baby born at home. and he had a set of twin brothers that were 9 pounds 8 ounces and 8 pounds 9 ounces born at home. And that was
This
in those
healthy
days.
pair of twins. But I just want to like pat that woman on the back. Like, good job. It's amazing.
Yeah, I never met her. She went on to glory long before I had the opportunity to meet her. I just think in our current day, we think of birth. So that question has a presupposition that in order to do a birth outside of the hospital without a midwife present, that there would be something specific necessary. And I guess I think, yes, there's some things that we should know. But I think those are the kinds of things that should be passed down from generation to generation. We should all understand the basics of birth. We should all understand the basics of good nutrition. We should all have a good connection with our spouse and our children. We should all be comfortable with those in our household being present when we give birth. And that used to be normal. And there are still places in the world where that still is normal. And so some of my prep work was just recognizing that and really trying to learn as much as I could about those regions now that are still, many of them are really remote. There's areas in South America, for example, where they don't have access to a professional midwife, but everyone knows how to give birth. And they all have a system for how to do that. And they all have a community of support, right? And there may not be one specific person. There are tribes where there are groups of women and they have a specific or things like that. They know how to give birth, and they don't wonder whether or not they can give birth. I guess that's what I've tried to do. I've tried to get to a place where I've recognized this is how God designed me to be. And there have been some things that I have done, but the more free births I've done, the more I've looked at it as this is just an extension of my normal life. It's not this extraordinary thing that I'm doing. It's just an extension of my normal life. And there's definitely a faith piece there. But a lot of it looks like this is God's baby. And I'm entrusting this baby that God created, that God knows intimately. And only God can bring this baby out of my body. And I'm trusting that He's going to do that. And if I'm honest with myself, I have a really hard time trusting God. All the time. As much as we know about birth, we really don't know that much about birth. It's such a mystery every single time. And anybody that works closely in birth will tell you that it's such a mystery every single time.
100%.
And every single time. I was just out in my garden today. And I'm like, oh my goodness, those radishes are coming up. They're coming up. Every time I plant seeds, I think they will not come up. And they always, surprise me and shock me. And I'm like, no way, they came up. And I feel like that I go through that process every time. Where I think, I know this is possible, but it seems so impossible. And I just have to trust that God is going to do this. But it's so hard to believe that God can bring this baby. For one thing, that my body can grow a baby and it can just keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And also that God can bring this baby out. And not only that it can be this delightful, beautiful, precious experience, the most intimate experience that ever has been. And I don't know if that answers things. I mean, there are things that I do. I am really careful with my nutrition. I try to increase my protein intake. I try to be careful about my hydration and have electrolytes on hand and things like that. And I do exercises to try to get the baby in an optimum position. I watch a lot of birth videos. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of spiritual preparation. A lot of it is reading scripture and just reminding myself over and over and over again, God can do this. God can do this to me. And knows how to bring babies out. I don't know how to do it. And I don't know how to put babies in either. God does all of that, right? That's the other reality. There's lots of people, there's lots of women who long for a baby and that baby never comes, right? I don't know that mystery and miracle of how God forms a baby, and I don't understand the mystery of how He brings a baby out. But I've seen it, and I've been a vessel of that over and over again. I don't know if that helps to explain it. A big part of it is the more that I've had, I feel like the better I've known my children, the better I've known my husband. And we just get kind of in a rhythm. We have a better understanding of what each stage of pregnancy looks like. I always know at the end. My husband gets kind of jittery and it helps for him to go do something by himself, things like that. And the night before my seventh baby was born, I sent my husband to the movies. I was in early labor that night, and then 6 a.m. or something, the baby was born, and it was like he was just a nervous wreck. He gets more nervous than I do.
I actually remember that from when you lived in Grand Rapids and you were coming to Sister Circles. I remember you talking about that jittery phase for him.
He just gets so nervous, and it's like nervous excitement, He's just like, baby, I just want to hold the baby so bad, and I'm like, well, I can't do anything about that, so you better go do something to distract yourself. And the more babies we've had, the older our kids have been, so the more understanding they have to be able to kind of, remember from last time and that kind of thing. So I don't know. I think a lot of it is just birth is just such a normal thing.
Mm-hmm.
We talk a lot in our culture. We talk a lot here in the U.S. about what if something happens? What if something goes wrong? You know how often people are walking down the sidewalk and trip and injure themselves? But we don't ask everyone every time they go walk down the sidewalk, what are you going to do if you trip and scrape your knee? Right? People get in car accidents. We don't ask them every time they get in a car, what are you going to do if you have a car accident? We trust that the Lord will guide them, right?
Mm-hmm.
Trust that they will respond and they will be supportive and they will help. We just trust that to the Lord. And that with birth too, because birth is normal. It's just a normal part of life. It's a miraculous, amazing, astounding part of life, but it's normal.
Yeah.
I used to look at it like walking down the sidewalk or driving in a car or breathing. We trust that our bodies will breathe. It's a normal function of our bodies, and birth is a normal function too.
So if for some reason you tripped on the metaphorical sidewalk during one of your labors or pregnancies, you would just trust that the Lord will give you the direction you needed in that moment to either handle that yourself or go seek the appropriate help. Is that accurate?
Some things that are clear signs of an emergency, a true emergency. So, there are things like placenta previa that are a no-brainer. You go to the hospital for that, obviously, right? And there are certain things that you just have that you have on your emergency planning list. But that would be true if you had a midwife as well, right? If you were doing home birth with a midwife. Many of the things that are a true emergency in a free birth situation are also a true emergency with a midwife. And she would say, I'm not even going to come, just head to the emergency room, right? And so, yeah, there are some things you have to think about ahead of time, and you have to have a basic emergency plan. But there's also a lot of gray there. There's a lot of gray area of well, we would play through that. And, there's a lot of talk about at what point the gestation would be too early to birth at home without a midwife. I don't have an answer for that. I don't have an answer for that. I know that for me personally, my babies tend to gestate. So I would be nervous at 37 weeks because I haven't had a baby that early. And if my baby was, 35 weeks or something, that would be very concerning for me. But for somebody that's had babies at 37 or 36 weeks, that probably wouldn't be very concerning for them, right? So, and at this point, I've had a lot of babies, so I have a pretty good gauge of what gestation is normal. Mm-hmm. But that wisdom comes with the more babies you have, the more of an average you have in your head.
Absolutely.
So, I don't know, there's a lot of little things like that people want a clear, concise answer on, and I feel like I don't know the answer. Because there are babies born at 35 weeks that need a long stay in the NICU. And there are also babies that are born at 40 weeks that need to be in the NICU. There's not a real clear gauge on that. And that's what makes people nervous. Mm-hmm. And that could be true with a lot of other scenarios. That could be true if you have a car accident. You can total your vehicle and walk away unscathed. right?
Yeah.
With severe injuries. It's, it isn't, birth is not an emergency situation. And when there are emergencies, even when you're in the hospital, it's amazing how long it can take sometimes. Especially like here, I guess that's the other thing I've done with I look carefully at what the hospitals in my area are capable of, what kinds of emergencies they can handle.
Smart.
And when you're in a rural area, they flight lift you for pretty much anything. They can't really handle much. They can handle bleeding issues. But beyond that, there's really not much. And I've known people that have had some pretty severe issues, like preeclampsia complications, and they've had to be flight lifted downstate. That's just how it is. There just isn't much capability in a small rural hospital. I think people get this impression that if they're in a hospital, that you're safe, that you're good, that they can handle anything. Everybody's got limits, even in a hospital, they have limits. And so, you're trusting God no matter what is the reality. Wherever you birth, you're trusting God. Wherever, no matter the situation, you're believing and trusting that God is going to walk with you through whatever may come. And there is no scenario where you're free of risk. It just isn't.
So true.
It's really good.
So true.
Yep. Wow. So I'm kind of hearing as I listen to you talk that one of our questions was like, what do you think it takes to be somebody who gives birth in this way? Like, what are the kind of the prerequisites, if you will, or what do you need to have kind of as a headspace? And I'm hearing already some of the answers to that, like a willingness to be okay with the gray area and with feeling your way through a situation with the Lord without having the ability to know in advance so many variables. And so it sounds like that's one thing you would say is an important feature in a unassisted birther. Is there anything else you can think of that you would say, if you're going to do this, you should definitely...
I think that some of what you're saying, I think almost is more true in a hospital setting, at least in my experience. For me, like, you don't know who's going to be on staff, right? And so you're trusting that God will give you kind nurses. And it's like, nurses are either like the most amazing, sweet women you've ever met who just are so dear to you and they treat you like you're their daughter. Or, bedside manner, and there doesn't seem to be much better. Right? And so that was always really hard in the hospital for me. And I've had both types of nurses, and actually I've had far more the sweet type of nurse than the other type. But I think that I think the biggest thing, and you've talked about this, is you have to recognize that you are taking ownership of your birth. And you have to be okay with that. And I think it's very comparable to when you're educating your children, right? In homeschool. So maybe that's part of it, right? Homeschool. Part of why I homeschool is I like being able to pick and choose what kinds of things we're going to learn, right? I like to be able to see this math curriculum didn't work for this child, and I can just switch it for something else that works better. Halfway through this school year if I need to, right? That's fine. We want to use what works. And I love that, and I don't think that there should be a strict rule. You'll have to, every kid that you have, right? I love learning about each of my individual kids and what works best for them. And that's true. And I think you have to, I can put my kids in school tomorrow, right? I'd still be responsible for their education. There's really no way to actually remove your responsibility. But we think that there might be. Right? We get overwhelmed as moms. We want to do this.
That school bus is looking real good right now. Take my kid.
But the reality is they're going to have homework and you're going to be helping them with that homework. There's going to be parent-teacher conferences and you're going to have to be in there for those. If something happens at school, they're going to call you because you are still responsible for those kids, even when they're out of your sight. And it's the same with birth. I think we like to think, okay, well, if I go to the hospital or if I hire a midwife, then that'll take care of that responsibility piece. Then they'll be responsible if something happens, right? And the reality is, it falls on me because I made the decision to go and see whoever I saw, have whatever interventions I decided to have, avoid whatever interventions I decided to avoid. That's on my shoulders. And there isn't really a way to subvert that responsibility because God gave me that responsibility as a mother. These children are put in my care by my Heavenly Father, who entrusted them to me for some bizarre, wild reason. What an amazing reason. I don't know. I don't know. I think sometimes those questions get sent. I guess to me, they seem to reflect it. And I think there's so much culturally that says that we should have a really careful rubric in place, and I just don't know that there's a way to do that. Just like there isn't a way to know what will be going on with your family in a year, right? Jobs can change, and where you're living can change, and goodness gracious, did any of us see 2020 coming? 2019, all of us had these plans in place, right? And God was like, well, you're going to have to find a new way, right? And I think that's just how it's supposed to. We do what we can to prepare, and then God really orchestrates the whole thing. But we have to, at the end of the day, take responsibility.
Amen.
And I really think that's the main thing that's necessary. I think the thing that changes a birth from being, it's funny that you brought that up, because I've been, and this wasn't one of your questions, but I'm sort of
That's okay.
trailing here, I guess.
Right.
The two things that were really foundational for me when I think back on like what actually inspired me to do this. The first one was when I was growing up, we had a neighbor who free birthed. And nobody talked about it that way. I remember my mom going over and visiting and bringing a meal after the baby was born. And they had 5 kids, I think. And they lived really rurally. They were like 45 minutes from the hospital. And my mom just said, yeah, they have their babies at home. And that's it. That's what my mom would say. Yeah, they have their babies at home. And they lived, just 1/8 of a mile down the road or whatever. And I know there were times that there were some minor complications. I think she had to get stitches at one point and went into the hospital. But other than that, they did their births at home, and that was what they did. And we didn't know people that were having home births, but they did, right? And it was just presented as this really normal thing. And my mom had natural hospital births, but I don't know, that was kind of an early thing that was ingrained in me, was that. And then another one that was the next foundational thing, which is a really goofy one, is I got really into the TLC show when I was a newlywed of I Didn't Know I Was Pregnant. Have you seen that show?
The baby story show.
No, I was
I
pregnant.
didn't know.
Oh, I didn't know I was pregnant. That was TLC. Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
I've never seen it.
And maybe it's
That's
a weird
funny.
one to say, but it's super dramatized. And they're like, oh, and the woman started having horrible stomach cramping, and they rushed her to the hospital, and she was bleeding. And they, almost every single episode ends with, and the mother and the baby were just fine. And I'm like, these women, don't even know they're having a baby. They have no preparation whatsoever. And it ends happily ever after, right?
Yeah.
And I got really into that show, and it's super, super cheesy. It's very poorly done. But the thing that got me was, and quite often these mothers were treated terribly in the hospital too. They would just treat them as if they were they'd bring them in and separate the baby, and the mom's all, and they're doing all these tests. And then after a while, and telling the mother all these worrisome things, But then they bring the baby back and say, actually, your baby's full term, and, you're fine, and the baby's fine, and everything's great. And
they're so perplexed that could possibly work.
Yeah, and it just struck me that, birth is normal. And even in situations where there isn't very much preparation, the mom doesn't even know she's going into labor. She doesn't even know there's a baby there. Wow, isn't that incredible that God prepares her? And there's even some episodes where I remember one episode, there was a placenta previous scenario. And the mom had the wisdom. She just knew something was severely wrong. She didn't know there was a baby. She didn't know any of that. She just had the wisdom that she needed to go to the emergency room. And they were able to do the C-section in time, and the baby was just fine. And, it's just again, in some emergency scenario, everything worked fine, right? And maybe they were careful about which people they chose, but that really was foundational to me too, as silly as it might sound. That goofy, cheesy, really poorly done show really planted another seed in my mind of just the normality of birth, that it's just such a normal thing, and also that culture does not view it as normal. These moms being given such a hard time when they did the right thing. They had amazing instincts. God gave them such wisdom in these moments when they had no idea there was a baby that they were, about to give birth to. He guided the process. And I do understand that there are scenarios that end tragically. But that's not specific to one type of birth. Tragic scenarios have birth spaces in all kinds of places and practitioners. So, that's a sad reality. Again, we have to go into pregnancy and into birth, recognizing this isn't my baby, this is God's baby. Kind of a rabbit trail there.
That's a good rabbit trail.
Good. Yeah.
Perfect. So I want to ask you another question that's maybe a little bit different than what we've been talking about, but I hope this is okay for me to bring up. I remember you kind of reached out to me at some point in your most recent pregnancy, which was like your 8th, and you were playing with the idea of hiring a midwife for the first time in quite a while. And so I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about that. Like, why was that something you revisited after having had so many free births in a row? Like, what made you think about that again? And then what ultimately made you not do it again or not hire the midwife?
I lost audio for her. Rosalie.
Can you hear me?
I can now. Could you just restart that whole sentence because it did not come through?
Sure. We considered hiring a midwife in other pregnancies. I think there's 6, 7, and 8 were ones I considered midwives. I don't recall if we had our 4th we would have, because we just lived in midwives. So it wasn't something that was completely off the table. And so I know one of the things that often comes up is, maritally, it's really husband and wife to have different emotions and sounds, right? And we weren't immune to that. And that was one of the things, anyways. I want to be sensitive to my husband's concerns, and my husband tends to be really nervous at the beginning of pregnancy and really nervous at the end of pregnancy. And so that was one of the things I was considering, because he was just dealing with a lot of nerves when we were at the beginning of the pregnancy. And maybe that's God guiding us to do something different. Again, I'm not against midwives. It's something that we have just prayed about. And I did actually go talk to 3 different midwives. So it wasn't even something that we were thinking about in theory. I explored it a bit. But, after talking to my husband, it was like he was moving through the jitters and was like, I think we should do it just us. And I was comfortable with that idea the whole time. It was just like, I want to be unified, right? I want to do what we are unified on.
Yes.
And I could go either direction. And I know you were in a situation like that too at one point.
Yep.
And so I think that is definitely a piece that's important, is being unified in your marriage is really, really important. And
yeah.
So that's something I've explored a few times. I have always been as open about it because I just tend to be plans.
Right. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Thanks for explaining that. That's really cool. And I think that indicates to me just how rightly ordered your commitment to free birth is, like you retain that openness to the Lord possibly leading you in a different direction with each pregnancy. And I think it's so healthy.
I think each pregnancy is unique, and I think it's one of those things that God guides you through. And I do think that as you're preparing for birth, no matter what you're preparing for, whatever you have in your head, recognize that, God could lead you in another direction. It's good to be open to whatever He's guiding you to. And sometimes that's a difficult situation. Ended up in the hospital in the cesarean, right? That happens. And the thing that makes that a traumatic scenario is they were praying through that. They felt very confident that God was with them and God was guiding them to do what they needed to do in that moment. That's the important, to be connected and that's one of the beautiful things about it. If you're doing it as a Christian, it's this opportunity you have to connect with someone that is really unmatched.
Oops, I said
So
absolutely. I was muted when I tried to talk.
such great wisdom, Rosalie. Just so deeply appreciate your perspective on this. Birth is just an extension of life, and we're called to follow ultimately where God is leading us each time, and trusting Him in that guidance, that this baby will be called forth by Him in those scenarios. And it just, I hear you saying it's just about trusting Him, not necessarily knowing. As you were talking, I actually kept thinking about the scripture, Mark 4:26-27. It says, "The kingdom of God is like this: a man scatters seed on the ground. He sleeps and rises night and day. The seed sprouts and grows, although he doesn't know how." And I just kept thinking about that scripture. We don't know how any of this works. It's such a beautiful mystery, and yet that's exactly how the kingdom of God is. And so, anyways, I would love to just hear any final advice or wisdom that you would give to someone that is considering, a DIY birth, and just following this living as designed kind of pathway.
I would say it's really important to have a good understanding of what is normal. So if you can do some study on cultures that are currently doing birth in a very normal way, that's wonderful. If you can study historically when we did view birth as just a normal thing, that's not that many times. You may be even able to find some records within your own family where people wrote down their experiences. There's a lot of stuff too. So that's a wealth of resources. And there's lots of podcasts. I really think it's important to hold your birth plan close to your heart. Only share your plans with people that you know will be very supportive. A huge part of it, no matter where you give birth, but when you're doing a free birth particularly, there's a particular type of faith necessary. And there's such emotional vulnerability there. And so it's important to have the boundaries and to not share with just anybody, because one little comment can really just send you spiraling. I think that's a really, really important piece. It's really important to be in a good place with if you have other children, with your children, prepare them well. Whether they'll be there or not, again, you just don't know. You may be planning to have some children up and your birthday go really quickly. So prepare them and work really diligently. Pray for your spouse. Pray for your husband regularly, vigilantly. Pray that God would give him wisdom. Pray that the holiness of birth would build your marriage. Pray that his eyes and ears and mind and spirit would be open to any needs that might be there. This is just the most beautiful, intimate thing I've ever done with my husband. And if I would have known that, I would have had free birth for all 8 kids. But I think that's a really important factor too. You just have to be in a good place in your marriage. It's so vital. And if you're not on the same page, pray for wisdom. Pray that God would put you in the same place and that He would guide you. And maybe you need to give, or maybe He needs to give, or maybe you both need to give. Being really prayerful and living as healthy as you can. I always at the end of pregnancy kind of hibernate a bit, because I just have to shut out all those negative voices. People say terrible things at the end of pregnancy. And I cannot handle it. I just can't handle it. And it's okay. And I think, again, that's the piece of our culture. We just have, I'm convinced we don't even know what gestation is. We don't know. Gestation, because it goes 42 weeks, right? And for all we know, 43 weeks is normal. We don't know. We don't really know. So recognize that. Be okay with that. And give yourself space and be prepared to just keep it down for a while. And that baby will be in your arms eventually. And if you know people who have had births, especially people that have done it with their life, try to glean wisdom from them. Listen to their stories. stories. If you don't know anyone like that, there are people sharing their stories. Yes, and YouTube. There are people that write their stories on blogs. It really does help other people too. And one of my favorite things, I mean, shows she always says, if you have fears, and that's really important, but it's especially important yourself. Walk yourself through those fears. Allow yourself to fully immerse in those fears. And then ask, how would God show up? Her name is Kira Blazer.
I'm having trouble hearing you, but I think you said her name is Kira Blazer, and that she said if you're having fears, walk yourself through those fears and ask how God would show up. Is that what you said?
Right. So, like, if you're afraid that maybe the baby would be born, you right? Walk yourself through that. The baby was born, or was the baby's God show up. Just, right? And if there's a really, really horrible situation, what if the husband and I get in a horrible argument? What if something really tragic? Walk yourself all the way through. Allow yourself to imagine it. And then pray that God would guide you. God would allow you to be a witness. He will allow you to shine light towards Him, even if something really bad were to occur, right? Because He will walk with you through that. I think it helps sometimes. And also, I think a lot of times we exaggerate. Pretty irrational. Anyway, I thought that was a really helpful pointer.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, the husband has this particular fears too. If he has a fear, and it's also good to rationally research. It's okay to walk through and think, what would I do? You know, I've walked through over and over again. I've never needed to stay happen, right? And every single time, what if I were in an urgent situation? Necessary. What would I do? What if all of my relatives were in hospital? What if I had to go? And it was really urgent, you know? And I just think, I know my husband would be there with the baby as would be, and I know God would be with us. And in that moment, as a young mother, I would just pray, God, bring that baby peace, bring that baby peace, bring that baby peace, right? And I think that's any situation, trusting God, we're going to have some, we're going to have to trust to allow God to work with you. What if that happens? Sometimes the things we fear happen, sometimes they don't, but it doesn't hurt to be prepared. And we can, no matter what happens, we can trust.
Amen. Thank you so very much for bringing all of this beautiful wisdom and sharing your heart and bits of your story for our listeners to just glean from, and be praying that that is just a seed for their hearts as it grows forth in ways that we don't know.
Yeah, such good stuff, Rosalie. Thank you so much for being willing to share. I think of how you just contributed to the body of wise insight and perspective from other free birthers, like you were just talking about. That's one good thing to do, is seek that out. And so thanks for providing some of that in this podcast episode.
And we can clip it on the end.
The other mom's stories too, that'll be neat.
Yes, it's going to be a fun series. I'm excited about it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rosalie.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning in to this week's episode of Holy Wild Birth. We hope that you were genuinely encouraged, inspired, and challenged by what you heard today. If you're loving what you hear, please make sure that you share it. Leave reviews. That helps other mamas find this content as well. And don't forget to read the show notes, okay? Because that's where you can find our email address if you want to reach out to us and start a conversation. It's also where you'll find free offerings as well as invitations to work with me and or Lauren. We can't wait to get to know you. See you next week.